Welcome to my channel. I'm Ben. Today, we enter a witnessless robbery, murder, that haunted investigators for nearly 2 decades. A neatly placed blue backpack, and a photo of 2 men before a red wooden door. Why were more than 100 yuan left on the floor while the knife vanished? On the night of August 13th, 1997, the dirt lane near Shenwan was so quiet you could hear insects stitching the dark. A homicide officer riding his motorbike home braked hard. A taxi sat in the road, headlights burning. Both doors flung open as if someone had fled in a hurry. In the driver's seat, a man slumped forward. His body was still warm. Forensics recorded a stark image, a steel wire looped around the neck, each end tied to a wooden toggle for leverage. A cut ran across the carotid artery, blood lashing onto the passenger seat and dripping to the rubber mats. There were no clear signs of a struggle inside the cabin, only the sudden interruption of breath. The knife was missing. Behind the driver's seat, over 100 yuan lay scattered, as if a ritual of payment had been broken mid-gesture. And on the rear bench, almost too neatly placed, sat a blue canvas backpack. The victim's name surfaced quickly. Mr. Zhang, 27, from Zhongshan. He hauled goods at the market by day, then started his night shift at 7 p.m. He had been on nights for less than 3 months. At home were a housewife, a 2-year-old daughter, and elderly parents who relied on his remittances. From that second on, his absence would mean not only grief, but the silent economics of a table missing its wage earner. Investigators worked backward from what silence left behind. Blood patterns suggested the slash came fast, near the passenger side. As the victim was being garroted, spatter read speed and precision. No bloody fingerprints, no usable DNA for that era. But one object spoke plainly: the backpack. In taxis, drivers keep papers and small bills on their bodies. The back seat belongs to strangers. A backpack placed neatly on that seat is rarely the driver's. The simple logic produced the first sturdy inference. The last passenger likely owned the backpack and quite possibly was the killer. The contents were dry but eloquent. Clothes and sneakers dusted with lime and cement. That gray-white ghost you can't fully wash out. A toothbrush, a face towel, the compact kit of someone working away from home. In a small photo pouch, most pictures were ordinary. One stood out, a crisp portrait of 2 young men, one taller, one shorter, standing before a red-painted wooden door. Unflinching faces, almost serene. The family confirmed that night. They knew neither of the men. The backpack was not Mr. Zhang's. Police sealed approaches, threw up temporary roadblocks, and mapped the likely path near the Dumen Bridge. The taxi's hood faced the bridge. In scene photos, the victim's right hand slanted faintly toward the front, perhaps random, as muscles relax after death. Yet the investigative instinct logged it. The assailants likely fled toward the bridge, avoiding the lit national road. What about the city's memory? At the City Garden taxi stand, several drivers remembered 2 young men approaching Mr. Zhang's car and asking for Shenwan. They had sat about 4 meters away, close enough to hear, too dim to see faces clearly. They remembered one tall, one short, a young gait. Under the sparse lights of the late 90s, voices traveled farther than faces. A working hypothesis took shape. At least 2 suspects. Weapons: a makeshift garrote wire with toggles and a knife never recovered. Motive: robbery, signaled by the scattered small bills. But panic or miscalculation made them abandon both money and backpack. Habits: tidy enough to set a bag neatly. Origin: likely construction laborers. supported by cement dust on clothes. Escape direction toward the Dumen Bridge, away from patrolled, well-lit roads. The case became File 813. Rewards were posted. The search widened from Zhongshan outward. Fingerprints from the taxi matched a tour guide named Guo. He resembled neither man in the portrait, but a match demands questions. In the end, tickets, client schedules, and witnesses proved he was at Mount Tai that night. Moreover, Mr. Zheng began his shift at 7 p.m., making Guo's print the innocent trace of a daytime fare, a dead end. Years layered into the file like sheets in a binder. No DNA, no bloody prints, no face to swear by. The routine became this: carry the two-man portrait into work camps, canteens, bus depot, taxi stands again and again. The red door in the image refused to name a market or street. There were no readable signs, only two faces. Persistence thickened into a promise. One day, the portrait would have names. Meanwhile, the city was changing. From the late 90s into the 2000s, construction labor flowed not only through Guangdong, but northward. Workers from Anhui, Hainan, and beyond moved into Jiangsu and Zhejiang factories, and sites drank hands like tidewater. Day wages, loose temporary registrations, small kits carried in backpacks. They arrived, worked, and moved on. That reality blurred names and, ironically, pointed the way forward. Part 1 ends here, with a portrait, a backpack, a dirt lane, and a pled. If the city won't answer, we'll follow the paths of those who left it to the places they might have gone. By the time sunlight thinned across Zhongshan, the city had already learned about the taxi abandoned on a dirt lane near Shenwan. People spoke of the victim as if he were familiar. Mr. Zheng, 27, lifting crates at the market by day, taking the wheel at 7 each evening, on night duty for less than 3 months. Home was a small rented room, a housewife, wife, a 2-year-old daughter, and long-distance calls to aging parents who lived on his remittances. That arithmetic made every detail at the scene turn heavy. 100 small yuan behind the driver's seat. A garrote of steel wire with wooden toggles still bent to the shape of a neck. A knife gone as if erased. But what raised the investigation to its feet was not a blood stain. It was a quiet object. A blue canvas backpack, placed almost primly on the rear bench. For a taxi driver, papers and change live on the body. The rear bench belongs to strangers. Trade logic made the backpack the first honest witness. Whoever sat there on the last fare likely owned it, and might also be the one who set the wire. Inside was the compact life of a migrant. Clothes and sneakers ghosted with lime and cement, a toothbrush and a face towel, and, at the bottom, a small pouch of photographs. Most were ordinary. One was not. 2 young men, one tall and one short, standing before a red-painted wooden door, faces steady and unafraid of the lens. The family looked and shook their heads. They knew neither man, and the backpack was not Mr. Zheng's. The photograph became, for the moment, the file's compass. Detectives returned to the city garden stand where drivers had gathered the previous night. Under the sparse lamps of the late 90s, voices carried farther than faces. Men who had sat about 4 meters away remembered 2 youths asking for Shenwan. They remembered the heights, one tall, one short, but not the features. Even so, the remembrance laid out a path, a pickup at the garden, a line toward Shenwan, over the Dumen Bridge, into the dirt lane where the taxi would be found. In scene photos, Mr. Zheng's right hand angled faintly toward the hood. It could have been the meaningless easing of muscles after death. Yet the investigative instinct filed it away like a dim arrow. The killers may have fled toward the bridge, away from the bright national road. The case took the date as its name 813 and began to breathe to the rhythm of procedure. Reward notices, photo appeals, long canvases. Prints in the cab carried no blood, just the anonymous drift of ordinary fares. Once, a match lit on a tour guide named Guo. He looked like neither man in the portrait, but a match demands questions, tickets, client schedules, and witnesses proved he was at Mount Tai on the night in question, and Mr. Zheng had begun at 7. Guo's print was the harmless relic of a daytime ride. Another dead end. Another sheet slipped into the binder. With forensic miracles out of reach, investigators were left to read the scene like a sentence crowded with metaphors. Blood told them the cut came near the passenger side, where vessels run closest to the skin. The wire suggested a short, hidden loop yanked from behind, enough to choke a seated driver before he could cry out. The order might have been this: a demand from the back seat, a fistful of small notes about 100 yuan passed forward, the ritual breaking, a wire tightened, a blade drawn and gone. Flight too quick for gathering cash or bag. Technique mattered, but what mattered more was the fracture of nerve, a bravado borrowed from rumor collapsing in the car's dim light. In the days that followed, the portrait shuttled between rooms and construction camps like a patient loom. Teams knocked, showed the photo, asked again, and returned with more shakes of the head than nods. Repetition, however, kept the case alive. Each year, when the file reopened, the photograph left its plastic sleeve for another circuit to squad rooms, to stations, to bus depots and canteens, where work clothes carried the same cement dust found in the bag. Zhongshan did not stand still. The city grew, and the labor tide moved. From the late 1990s into the 2000s, job sites were no longer just in Guangdong. Workers from Anhui, Hainan, and Jiangxi left home, came south, then fanned into Jiangsu and Zhejiang, places that drank manpower like a thirst. They carried simple backpacks, loose, temporary registrations, day wages. They arrived, worked, and moved on, leaving gaps that paperwork could not close. Against that backdrop, the 100 yuan on the floor discovered its meaning. For a night shift renter, small bills are the bloodstream of a shift. Fuel, change, deposits. The amount isn't large, but it can bend a household's next day or two. Left behind, it spoke twice. Robbery intent was real, and fear outran the plan. Alongside the too tidy backpack and the too clear portrait, it gave the file its posture. Endure. By the end of part 2, we are back where we began. A dirt lane, a taxi, and a portrait at a red door. But the horizon has widened. If the city will not answer, investigators will leave the city, carrying the photograph into the migrant currents that have redrawn the labor map of China's east. They did not yet know where the nod would come, only that in a world slowly learning to connect, a photograph would eventually find its way. In the first days after the murder, Zhongshan seemed to hold its breath. Then the city kept moving, concrete poured. Buses filled, while in a small squad room, the portrait of 2 young men before a red door slid in and out of a plastic sleeve every time Case 813 was mentioned. The case survived on ritual, reward posters, canvassing. In a return to the city garden stand, to ask men of the night the same question: have you seen these 2? The answer was emptily consistent. One tall, one short, nothing more. With forensic tech not yet able to carry the load, detectives read the scene by reasoning. Analysts redrew spatter paths, measured the wire loop, studied the tide toggles, and improvised garrote, tidy and short enough to vanish in a palm. The probable sequence did not change. A cash demand from the back seat, roughly 100 yuan passed forward. The ritual of robbery breaking, wire tightening and blade flashing. Then a flight so hurried it abandoned both money and backpack. The knife evaporated. The wire remained, pointing to intimate proximity. Once, a print in the cab matched a tour guide named Guo. Rules said a hit must be chased. They knocked, checked tickets, tour schedules, witnesses, and proved that on the night of August 13th, Guo had been at Mount Tai. Besides, Mr. Zheng's shift began at 7 p.m. The print could only belong to a daytime fare. Another dead end. The file thickened. Not by breakthroughs, but by persistence. The backpack kept telling the clearest story. Lime and cement dust in the fabric and on the shoes implied construction work. From that hint, the squad widened its circle to work camps around Zhongshan and further out. In heat-season dorms, men slept on bunks, ate salted meals, wore t-shirts bleached by labor. Each had a story of leaving home. The portrait passed from hand to hand. Most heads shook no. Still, it etched into the squad's memory. The shorter face carried a faint scar on the brow, a slight mark on the left cheek, small anchors in a sea of anonymous faces. Each year, the annual review returned to 813. On the board, burglaries, muggings, assaults closed with a neat stamp. At the end, one box left open. Zhongshan taxi blue bag. It lowered the room's tone. The town's lone unsolved murder was more than a number. It was a reminder in uniform that something remained undone. Outside, Mr. Zheng's family endured, a wife without steady work, a daughter growing from 2 to school age, parents calling less often, near month's end, because they knew the answer wouldn't change. Not yet. In the files, scene photos sat beside a map. Arrows marked a route. City Garden, Shenwan, Dumen Bridge, Dirt Lane. It was more than geography. It was a pattern learned from rumor. Pick up in a busy zone, to drift toward the edge of light, then escape along a quiet road. The squad rechecked similar robberies across Guangdong, laying out mugshots of men who had used wire, who had beaten drivers, tables filled with comparisons, and none truly matched the portrait at the red door. While method stalled, society sped up. By the late 90s and early 2000s, migrant labor flowed out of Anhui and Henan southward, then curved northeast into Jiangsu and Zhejiang. They carried backpacks, worn ID cards, phone numbers scribbled and pasted to doors moving service. Cargo haul. Xu, later caught in Liaoning, was that kind of man. A number on a door, a truck for a living. The squad did not yet know his name, but they had the pattern. They began to step beyond the province, first with unofficial visits, carrying the portrait to nearby towns, stopping by intercity depots, passing the image to colleague stations. A national face system was still a future story. Walking remained the shortest way to put a photo in front of the right eyes. In return came frayed threads, looks like him almost, men like that, everywhere. Tired answers, yet they did not stop. The 10th year, 2007, passed like a sigh. Minutes recorded the same line. Continue reward. Continue interprovincial checks on robbery suspects. Persistence has no shape, but it has weight. And at some point, that weight pulled the picture out of inertia. Late 2015 into early 2016, amid a push to review cold files, Shenwan decided to carry the portrait farther than its usual circuit, to Suzhou, Jiangsu, where robbery archives had grown thick under the draw of industry. That choice was a turn measured in endurance. Stop asking who they are, and ask where men like them would go. Dropping the photo into the repositories of a region swollen by migration was like planting a seed in the right soil. Part 3 ends with the team packing the file, sealing the portrait back in plastic, and preparing to head north. No promises were made, only the silence had changed. It now pointed somewhere. In the summer of 2016, 19 years after August 13th, 1997, the plastic sleeve holding the portrait at the red door slipped into a frayed briefcase. The 813 team left Zhongshan and rode north to Suzhou. No one spoke much on that train. The reason had been memorized long ago. If the photograph could not find its names in Guangdong, take it to where men like those in the photo had gone to work and live. Jiangsu and Zhejiang, regions that drank in labor like a wick drinks oil. The first meeting was in a plain conference room with Suzhou colleagues. Copies of the portrait stood upright under white light. Around it sat binders of robbery case archives, strips of booking photos, and registration cards blurred by age. The request was straightforward. Please compare by hand every relevant case and look for faces that lean toward these two. There was no national face system here, only eyes trained to tell a cheekbone from a square jaw, an interocular distance from a brow slope, and to notice small signatures like a faint brow scar and a mark on the left cheek of the shorter one. From Suzhou, the network widened to Hangzhou, Ningbo, Jiaxing. Each place added a drawer of records, a cold box pulled from a shelf. The method was primitive, yet rigorous. Note facial morphology, cross-check stated height, color code similarity, then cross-examine lists across teams. The first pass ended after weeks. More than 100 faces lined up against the portrait. A few looked uncannily close at first glance, but timelines, scars, ear shapes, or travel histories knocked them out. One man was jailed in the wrong year. Another stood over 1.70 meters. Another had no construction history at all. The room closed. Batch 1 with a negative and a strange feeling. The more they eliminated, the sharper the shorter face became in collective memory. Meanwhile, the Zhongshan group kept walking the line between emotion and evidence. They replotted the route of the murder night on a wall map: City Garden to Shenwan to Dumen Bridge to Dirt Lane, to keep faith that the portrait was not a meaningless keepsake. Old minutes were opened again. The tour guide fingerprint hit and cleared. About 100 yuan scattered. The knife still unfound. All threads bent back to the logic of the backpack. The last passenger was likely a construction laborer. The second pass began at once. This time the list held 77. A man who ran the faceboard would later say there was a moment when the room lost its sound, somewhere in the 20s. One face would not leave the table. Liu Mukan, from Huayuan, Anhui, arrested in Ningbo for robbery in 2005, sentenced to 1 year and 6 months. His booking photo lit up 3 points at once: a small brow scar, a faint left cheek mark, a full mouth. The record listed about 1.65 meters, matching the memory of the shorter one. A backward check of travel traces placed him on construction jobs between Guangdong and Zhejiang from the late 90s into the 2000s. After 19 years, the portrait had finally pointed to a name. As with every turning point, the find demanded care. At the same time, old local rosters from Liu's home county surfaced another detail. A tall schoolmate, Yang Hao, had once posed for a graduation photo with that cohort. Someone said he looked very much like the taller boy in the portrait. They could not risk leaks in a county where a single call can cross half the district in minutes. A plan took shape over one evening. Split in two. One team to Huayuan, under a business pretext, to intercept Liu. Another to Yangzhou to be ready to lock down Yang Hao if needed. On paper, it was clean. In truth, they all knew. With one warning, 19 years could evaporate in a single ringtone. The night before departure, the deputy chief sat longer than usual with the portrait. From a nameless image, it had survived 2 human passes, outlived 100 near matches, and settled on one. But the history of 813 had taught them modesty. Nothing was a conclusion until the field could hold it up. Outside, Suzhou was quiet. Inside, a red marker circled Liu Mukan and added 2 small words: check scars. At dawn, the teams separated. In Huayuan, early questions were seeded as business inquiries lost paperwork. Need an aluminum glass frame man to approach naturally. Local talk placed Liu back home, running a small aluminum and glass shop at the town's muddy edge. Break noise alone could make heads turn there. In Yangzhou, the parallel team confirmed addresses and shifts for Yang Hao, keeping a polite distance. Their job was not to grab at any cost, but to keep the air quiet until Huayuan could say yes. From here, the story split into 2 pulses. In Huayuan, the blue backpack and the portrait were packed in their own pouch. The last instruction put them on the table the moment it's safe. In Yangzhou, the lead repeated, like a mantra, the checks to make if contact came: height, jawline, brow. The faint marks a graduation photo rarely reveals. Both teams knew that a minute of impatience could drop 19 years. Part 4 ends on the threshold of a 2-pronged approach. The photograph now has a name, but it must travel the remaining half to turn name into person and event. Before the door opens, only one thing is certain: the once silent backpack has led them the right way. The rest, placing evidence before suspects and waiting for truth to speak for itself, belongs to the next day. The noon heat in Huayuan pushed across a patchy dirt lot in front of a small aluminum and glass workshop. The squad scattered into roles. One asked about door frames. Another haggled over panels. Another sat in the tea stall across the lane. In a thin black satchel lay 2 objects that had traveled for 19 years: the blue canvas backpack and the portrait at the red door. One last reminder to each other: put them on the table only when it is safe, and let silence do the first work. Liu Mukan walked in around early afternoon. He was compact, on the shorter side, with one faint scar across the brow and one old mark on the left cheek, small signatures the team had memorized, like a catechism. In the instant he lifted his head, those features locked to the shorter face in the photograph. No one said that aloud. They talked about frames, glazing, measurements, letting the room return to business. Then the deputy nodded. Time. The backpack went down first, the portrait after it. When the man heard the short introduction, "We're from Zhongshan, Guangdong," he turned away and covered his face with both hands. A gesture, both boyish and exhausted. No one touched him. The ceiling fan turned, and a silence, as long as 19 years, settled on the room. After one long breath, Liu lowered his hands and said one word: "All right." In the first interview, Liu recited the story the file had nearly predicted. Early August 1997, less than 1 month into a construction job near Zhuhai, he argued with the foreman over day wages, walked off, and ran out of fare to get home. In the shed, Someone spoke a single sentence that hardened into a plan. Rob a taxi, then go home. A steel wire with wooden toggles, a borrowed garrote, was made in haste. One knife hid deep in a pocket. On the 13th night, they chose Mr. Zheng's car, asked for a shortcut near the Dumen Bridge. When about 100 yuan in small notes slid back, the rhythm broke. Wire tightened, blade flashed, and panic flooded the car, leaving money and backpack behind. But his statement pivoted the map. The taller boy in the portrait, shoulder to shoulder at the red door, did not ride with him that night. He was a schoolmate. Yang Hao, a graduation keepsake Liu had tucked into the bag before heading south. The real partner, Liu said, was Xu Muxing, a relative, 13 years older. The room quieted another notch. A new name, an arrow pointing north. At that moment, the Yangzhou team quietly shadowing Yang Hao was told to hold distance and wait. Everything now hinged on cross-checks. Liu's Ningbo booking photo from 2005 for robbery against Scar. Cheek mark, full mouth, height around 1 meter, 65, matching the memory of the shorter one. Travel traces, placing him between Guangdong and Zhejiang for years. Neighbors near the workshop confirmed he had recently returned and opened the shop, layer after layer of verification stacked like laminated wood until the seams sat flush. The next round of questions pushed into the broken beat inside the cab. Liu said there was no original intent to kill. The idea was take the money and run. He remembered the gravel chewing under the tires as the car left the paved road, the dashlight reflecting on the windshield. The small bills gathered in a few thin bundles, and one detail. The file had only inferred that moment changed color in his head when he thought the driver was hiding money. While the other hand, Shu's, had already pulled the loop. The knife moved like reflex. The knife has never been found. The wire remained. While Huayuan wrote reports and sealed items, the Yangzhou team checked addresses and shifts for Yang Hao, ready with a plan if needed. But when the written confession arrived, they let him go to ordinary life because the graduation photograph had returned to its place. A memento, not a charge. The next step was already on the interview table. Xu Muxing made a living with a truck, taking moving and haul jobs. His phone number pasted to a rental door. The home address in Anhui would be the starting pin. But his voice, when officers placed a discreet test call, came from far away. Panshan County, Liaoning. He said he would be home in a day or two. The room exchanged looks. One leak could cut the current they had taken 19 years to find. Part 6 will tell of a pre-dawn takedown. For Part 5, what matters most is the first yes. The portrait now had a name, and the blue backpack finally pointed to a person with 2 covered hands. Escorting Liu from the workshop in cuffs, silent, a young investigator saw the white dust still clinging to his trouser hem and understood why the backpack had stayed true all along. Backpack speaks to trade. Trade speaks to route, and route had brought them to Huayuan. The compass needle on that portrait at last could swing north. Just before dawn, the highway edge outside Panshan held its breath. No streetlights. Diesel in the air. A truck sat in a bare lay-by. The cab, a dark box. The instruction was simple. Do not let the man touch the accelerator. The team split into 2 rings and waited through the cold hour, when breath shows in the dark. A middle-aged man cracked the door, dropped down, stretched. That instant, figures slid from the verge, locked the wrists, and pinned him to steel. Xu Muxing was cuffed in the smell of hot diesel. From Huayuan to Panshan, The invisible line between scattered archives finally tightened. Meanwhile, in Huayuan, Liu Mukan had already admitted what the file had been whispering. The blue backpack and the portrait at the red door lay on the table like the last two tiles. When he heard "We're from Zhongshan," Liu covered his face with both hands, then offered one word that swung open a door shut for 19 years. Cross-checks moved quickly but precisely. A faint brow scar, a mark on the left cheek, a full mouth, height around 1.65 meters, and years of construction work between Guangdong and Zhejiang, every detail aligned. In the interview rooms, the two stories braided like wire. Early August 1997. Liu left Anhui for Guangdong, took a job near Zhuhai, and in less than 1 month, quarreled over day wages, walked off, and ran out of money to get home. Someone said a single sentence that hardened into intent. Rob a taxi, then go. They copied a steel wire garrote with 2 wooden toggles short, concealable, cruel, then added 1 knife. On the night of August 13th, they chose Mr. Zheng's cab by the city garden, asked for Shenwan, then a shortcut toward the Dumen Bridge. About 100 yuan slid back in small notes, and the ritual broke. Shu drew the loop tight. Liu slashed across the carotid. Blood fanned the passenger seat and spattered the rubber mats. The knife vanished into night. The wire stayed biting. Cash scattered. The backpack was left so neatly, it looked placed, not dropped. They ran toward the bridge, hid along the hill's dark edge, then clung to coal freights for days, thrown off, climbing again, stealing food, and crawling back to Anhui. In the years after, Liu drifted across Jiangsu and Zhejiang, picking up a robbery case in Ningbo in 2005. Shu made a living with a truck. His phone number pasted to a rented door for moving jobs. The graduation photo at the red door, which Liu had tucked in his bag before heading south, had misled the hunt for years. The taller boy was Yang Hao, not involved. The real partner was Shu, 13 years older. After the takedown in Panshan, procedures turned like gears. Reports, seals, handoffs. Within hours, interprovincial units aligned and prepared to transfer both suspects to Zhongshan. By November 2016, Liu and Shu were back in Shenwan for supplemental statements. A notice went to Mr. Zheng's family. The two faces finally had names. Detectives would later say the room felt lighter for a moment. The town's single unsolved murder was no longer a blank space. Triumph did not linger. Paperwork rose like a ridge. Confrontations, reenactments, timelines against roots, blood angles, wire tension, even the driver's seat height against the arc of the cut. Fragments that had seemed dry for years were turned again. And for the first time in 19 years, they fit. One investigator wrote in the final memo, "No DNA, no bloody prints. We had one backpack, one portrait, and persistence." True enough. What changed was not a miracle, but a world that had shifted. Interprovincial sharing, thickening archives grown by migration, and a list from Suzhou that placed Liu in the center of a table. When news of the arrests reached the home, the daughter, once 2 years old in the early reports, was now a university student, and she cried in her mother's arms. Grief does not vanish when names are spoken. It merely turns its face, but a promise had been kept. The photograph was no longer nameless. On the night of transfer back south, the portrait slid into its sleeve again, but its meaning had changed. For 19 years it had been a compass pointing at two faces. Now it was a witness that could tell a route. From Guangdong to Jiangsu, Over to Zhejiang, bending north to Liaoning, the backpacks of men working far from home, a number on a door, a truck waiting in the dark before dawn. This chapter closes on the city's long exhale. Tomorrow, the file will climb the steps of procedure. Tonight, someone allows themselves to believe that patience, carried far enough, can finally be seen. After the transfer south, Shenwan breathed as usual, while the file moved differently. Confrontations, reenactments, route reconstruction from the city garden to the Dumen Bridge. Detectives stitched the narrative with details that rarely make headlines. Blood spatter angles, tension marks from a steel wire with 2 wooden toggles. The moment about 100 yuan was passed forward and then scattered. The trace of lime and cement inside the blue backpack. There was no DNA, no bloody fingerprint. The spine of the case was 1 photograph, 1 backpack, statements that fit the scene, and corroboration of a faint scar and height near 1.65 meters. On June 6, 2017, the court spoke. Liu Mukan was convicted of robbery and murder, receiving life imprisonment with confiscation of all property. Xu Muxing, as accomplice, received 14 years. No one raised a voice in the courtroom. It felt as if 19 years of persistence had eased a door shut. The law spoke in clauses. The truth that survived spoke in silence. The section for the victim was brief and heavy. Mr. Zheng's wife, a housewife, stood for a moment and bowed. The child who was 2 then is grown now. Photographs on a small table at home had long been the only proof a father had lived. The sentence does not restore a household, but it restores a promise the city kept pinned to a wall for 19 years. The 2 faces in the portrait have names. After court came lessons repeated in driver trainings. Avoid isolated shortcuts. Keep papers and cash on your body. Watch through the mirror when 2 passengers split seats. And buy time when instinct stirs, by stopping where there is light and people. It is not a charm, only seconds added to survive. By night, the portrait at the red door slid back into its plastic sleeve with a different meaning. From a blurred map, it had become testimony. 1 photograph, 1 backpack, 100 yuan on the floor, and 19 years of refusal to quit. In a city where traffic still combs the grass along dirt lanes, that promise was finally kept.